Once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats and we'll go ahead and get this panel started. A little bit of a change for this panel. We are going to be accepting both written questions, and then towards the end, if we still have time, we'll open it up to the floor and use the microphone. So if you have a question throughout the panel that you would like to, or throughout the discussion that you'd like to raise to the panel, please just use the pad of paper in front of you and write that question, and then raise it up high, and one of our security folks will come by and pick that up. And security folks, if you could just bring that up to me, then I'll get it to the panel. I'd like to introduce Cadet Third Class Chris Fortier to introduce our next panel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christopher Fortier. I'm a sophomore at the Air Force Academy, and I'm currently majoring in computer network security, and I'm an active member on our cyber warfare team. The leader for this panel is Lieutenant General Retired Harry D. Raduege. General Raduege served for 35 years. During that time, he successfully led the $1 billion expansion of the DoD's global information system. He was the architect of the military's computer network attack and defense capability, and led our nation's efforts to restore telecommunications to New York and the Pentagon following the 9/11 attack. Prior to his last assignment, General Raduege directed command and control for the North American Aerospace Defense Command, U.S. Space Command, and Air Force Space Command. He's now the chairman of the Center for Cyber Innovation and the Cyber Risk Services Senior Advisor and Director for Deloitte and Touche. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lieutenant General Harry Raduege. Mr. Raduege.
Thank you, Chris. We're in the very end. Okay, it's great to see everyone here, and Chris, thank you for that very nice introduction. I want to start off by just giving my compliments to the AFCEA Rocky Mountain chapter and everyone who has organized this tremendous event. I know they have been working on it for pretty close to this full year, and I think the way they have arranged this, and just as a reminder, is that they put this together as a 3-day event to address the first day the policy, the second day the partnerships, and the third day solutions to the issues that we're bringing up. So this being the second day, I'm very, very pleased to be able to have assembled this panel of cybersecurity experts so that we can address those issues and opportunities that involve partnerships. And this industry panel has really got some unique insights into that. And frankly, I am very, very excited to hear what they have to say, as always. First off, let me just talk a little bit about the ConOps and the rules of engagement for this panel. First off, I'm going to give some opening comments here from the podium. And then I'm going to introduce each speaker, and we're going to be going alphabetical order by last name, because I would hate to try and prioritize the stature of any of these individuals. They're all top of the heap. They will then each speak for about 5 to 7 minutes to give introductory comments. I have asked them to do that, so they have thought these through. Then I'm going to turn to the audience for questions and answers. And in the past, we've always had really good success with this audience, with the quality and the quantity, frankly, of the questions that come forward. And taking a note from our previous speaker, I went to Dean Hullings and I said, we haven't been doing the written question opportunity this year yet. I said, is there a problem with doing that? And I went to Dean because, as our previous speaker said, don't take no from anybody who can say yes. And Dean was the man who could say yes, and so that's why he's already announced that we're going to take questions from the audience that are in written form or spoken form. Some people just don't like microphones. I want you all to really take advantage of this panel. Any of these individuals, it would probably take you a month or so to even get time on their calendars. They travel extensively. They have huge responsibilities globally. So take advantage of this great opportunity. They are in deep demand, heavy demand globally. Now, some of you probably saw me walking around here yesterday in a normal status. And last night I had gone home after the event to change clothes to come back for the Wounded Warrior event. And as I parked my car here in the lower area, I started walking across to the hotel, and I think I hit a pebble in the road, and all of a sudden I heard this snap in my right knee, and a tremendous pain went through. So I've already got my appointment with my surgeon on Monday. Have done that already with the left knee, so no surprises there. But if you see me hobbling and with this cane here, it's not so I can beat members of the panel, but it is so that I can get a little bit more stability. I want to also thank, frankly, Wanda Williams of our security force here, Gene Mattingly, my longtime friend, and Colonel John Young, who just happened to be in close proximity last night and helped me to my car. So thank you very much. So this morning, I was communicating with my panel members here and telling them, you know, we're going to meet up and everything. And John Stewart was the first one that responded to me. And he said, I might be a little slow today. He says, my plane didn't land until 2:15 a.m. And so then General Vautrinot, Zan, got back. She came back and she said, not seeing what John had said, she says, I got in really early this morning. And I said, John got in at 2:15. She says, I beat him by a few minutes. So we got a couple panel members here who they're showing you already the warrior status never leaves your body. You know, these folks are committed when they say they're going to do something, even if it's no sleep. Well, let me just launch in very quickly to talk a little bit about partnerships. And I think there's lots of examples there. And as I've been listening to the speakers already, you know, it's not just public-private partnerships that we think of an awful lot. It's internal government partnerships. There's government to government internationally, those kind of partnerships, industry to industry, academia working with government and industry. And so there's different perspectives that everyone brings to what a partnership really means. But certainly, I think all of our speakers already have touched on the fact and acknowledged the fact that there's growing interdependence in the partnering areas of this business area in particular. Now, I want to also shout out Bob Shea, General Shea, because yesterday at lunch, he really showed his passion and his eloquence when he talked about our organization, Armed Forces Communications Electronics Association, which actually has met the call and continues to meet the call and is up for the challenge of the future. So it's already got everything involved that you need as far as partnerships with government, industry, and academia, not only nationally, but also internationally. So support AFCEA. So happy that we have Bob Shea now as our new president and CEO of AFCEA International. Partnerships. Well, one of the best examples for me and the experience that I've had on partnerships was the Commission on Cybersecurity for the 44th presidency. Now, I was very honored and privileged to be asked to be one of the 4 co-chairs of that particular commission. And we started meeting back in January of 2008. And one of the members that was on that commission for the 3 years that we met is John Stewart. And so we worked together for 3 different years. And John, can you believe it's been 7 years since we started? I mean, time flies, unbelievable. But we were talking about cybersecurity and putting together our thoughts on that we're going to go forward to the President, the Congress, and anyone else who wanted to read that commission report. Now, we had four co-chairs, Scott Charney of Microsoft, who many of you know. We also had Congressman, now Chairman, Michael McCaul, who chairs the Homeland Security Committee in the House. And we also had Congressman Jim Langevin. And so the four of us were the co-chairs, and we had 60 participants from across government and industry and academia. And we published our first report right at the, matter of fact, it was 5 days prior to President Obama's inauguration. We co-signed the letter to President-elect Obama, as a matter of fact. And there were some nice things that came out of that first report. We had 4 findings and 25 recommendations. And some of the things that that we were able to influence with our report was the fact that the President launched a 60-day cybersecurity assessment, as you remember, led by Melissa Hathaway, as a matter of fact. And that resulted in a cyberspace policy review that was officially published by the President in May of 2009. Then the congressional members that were co-chairs went to Capitol Hill because nobody even spoke cyber at that time. Didn't even talk about cyber, but the 2 congressional members, McCaul and Langevin, started the Cybersecurity Caucus on the Hill in September of 2009. And one other thing that I think we influenced was the fact that we recommended that our nation needed to have a national level leader in the White House or able to talk to the President about cybersecurity. That ended up being the cybersecurity coordinator, which was Howard Schmidt. He was the first person. And I think interestingly and of significance is the fact that Howard enjoyed a chair in the National Security Council and the National Economic Council. That is a huge message of the importance of this, not only for our national security, but our national economic security. So our commission was actually asked to stay together. We wrote a second report, and matter of fact, Senator Lieberman had a big influence on what the subject was. He said, I want you to address the cybersecurity human capital workforce crisis that we have. Because everybody said we need more cybersecurity individuals, trained and educated, and we didn't have that. There were estimates of how many that we needed, but Senator Lieberman kind of drove our efforts, and we stayed together another year and presented that report. And then we were asked to stay together as a commission for a 3rd year, and we were asked to give a report card on how well our nation did on the first report that we had 4 findings and 25 recommendations. So it was wonderful. That report was published in 2011. Well, interestingly, in November of 2012, one of the quotes that was sort of put things in perspective was Senator Susan Collins. She said, in all my years on the Homeland Security Committee, I cannot think of another issue where the vulnerability is greater and we've done less. So I have the opportunity still of getting together for dinner with Congressman McCaul, Chairman McCaul now, and also Congressman Langevin. And an interesting thing happened. Congressman Langevin asked me to go to lunch with him on Capitol Hill right before the holidays this last year. And he said, so we met it was about the 2nd week in December. And he said, Harry, I've been reelected to another term here. He's a Democrat from Rhode Island. He says, I know the Congress is going to change when we come back from break. But he says, what's it going to take, to get some of this cybersecurity legislation that we've been talking about now for so long, what's it going to take, in your estimation, to get some of this through? And I said, Congressman, I think it's going to take perhaps the new Congress. Things might happen there. But I said, I think it's also going to perhaps take a crisis. Well, it was just a couple weeks later, about a week later, as a matter of fact, that we had the Sony attacks. And interestingly, since 2005, there's been about 75 data breaches that we know of in which 1 million or more records have been compromised. So these are big events. Now, in comparison, the Sony event that happened in November of 2014 was tiny by comparison. The hackers only accessed about roughly 47,000 employment and salary records, along with the email exchanges between Hollywood executives. Of course, that hit the news. However, as we've already pointed out in some of our other discussions, there was other seriousness with the Sony report that mostly involved threats to our nation's core values. And it took us a little bit of time to realize that. Interestingly then, on December 18th, just before the president was ready to launch on holiday vacation, and seemingly after this series of events that we had and also then the Sony event, there was 5 long debated and negotiated cybersecurity-related laws that were ready, waiting, and he signed them on that date. And of course, those have been worked on over on Capitol Hill for a long time, and many in this audience and at this table here on this panel have been involved in creating those cybersecurity laws. Now, as already been recognized, I think by General Meyerose yesterday and also by Mark Weatherford, those laws are there. They're not tremendously significant, but it's a step forward. And basically, it's 5 new cybersecurity laws involving information sharing between government and the private sector, certain federal activity responsibilities and authorities, cybersecurity workforce assessments, and the development of codification of a national cybersecurity center serving both the public and private sectors. So we're making progress. Now, another great national level partnership that I think that we've witnessed here recently is the 2014 published cybersecurity framework. And probably the most important thing on that cover sheet is it says it's version 1.0. And of course, that was public-private partnership working together. It was a great thing. Department of Defense activities worked with DOD. People in the oil and gas community worked with energy. We had people in the banking and finance working with Treasury, all coming together, a 1-year report that actually created a framework. And I remind you that that's also where we said, let's focus our efforts in this nation to critical infrastructures, and we came up with 16 of the critical infrastructures, which has already been mentioned. And I might mention also that you know that 85% of these critical infrastructures are in the hands of the private work community. So now work continues on the cybersecurity framework. We're going into version 2.0. Work is already taking place. I'm proud that my organization, Deloitte, has hosted a number of those meetings over the years between the government and industry activities. So just a few words about major trends that I'm seeing, because this might set up some comments also by the panel members. I think there's major trends that are going to be demanding even increased partnering in the future. Boardrooms and situation rooms. There's no longer, this IT and cyber is no longer a backroom type topic. It is in the boardroom and the situation rooms. The reality is that certain CEOs have been fired and board members are being sued because of fiduciary responsibilities not being upheld by in the minds of the shareholders. It's inevitable, I think, that boardrooms and also situation rooms and General Hyten and his staff and everyone, you're noticing too that you've got to deal with clouds, you've got to deal with mobility, and you've got to deal with bring your own device because that's required. Everybody's dealing with that. So there's changing roles in the C-suite, in industry, and I think there's also a lot of military organizational structures that are being changed all around this area of cyber and cybersecurity. Department of Homeland Security, which I'm privileged to work closely with, has identified a while ago that you can't separate physical security from cybersecurity. Matter of fact, my friend down here, Dmitry Alperovich, a couple years ago at the RSA conference out in San Francisco, as he talked, he also briefed, and he had one laptop computer that was the target. It was a nice Apple computer. He had another Apple, and as he talked, he got into the IP address of the target computer. He shut down the fans, got into the operating system, shut down the cooling fans, and then loaded up each core processor to 100% of its time, and the laptop actually caught on fire right there. I mean, flames. Now, Dmitry says he has a little trouble because these local Apple shops starting to get, a little confused when he takes these back that something just happened to this device where it caught on fire and it's all turned from white to black. But anyway, this vividly showed in my mind the fact that the physical and the cyber are there and they're living together. Department of Homeland Security also is providing situational awareness from government activities to industry, and there's lots of partnering implications there. And I know in Silicon Valley, I was there with Suzanne Spalding, the Honorable Suzanne Spalding and Dr. Phyllis Schneck not too long ago, and they announced, and they were asking some of the people in the Valley if there was an appetite for a civilian-type clearinghouse, or if DHS should do this, and they're gathering ideas about that. They're also considering an international coalition, not just 7 eyes or 7 different nations, but they said, should we go to 70 eyes, you know, looking at this and collaborating? So we need to be more public about, also about global CERT to CERT involvement. In the contracting area and mergers and acquisitions, what I'm seeing is increasingly people need to know about the cyber hygiene of the organization that you're partnering with. You know, you can't just take it for granted. And what are the network tentacles and connections that this organization that you may be merging or acquiring with or gaining contractor type support from is very important, and it's growing importance. Insider threats are huge these days. 50% of the breaches are attributed to insiders in many areas. And last points, cyber law is becoming a big deal now. Cyber insurance is being requested and purchased. As a matter of fact, the insurance companies are starting to dip their toe into it. They're giving people, you know, $10 million to $15 million worth of protection. But you know what they're doing? Cyber insurance companies are also tying the vulnerabilities of organizations before they insure them to the cybersecurity framework. So that's why that is important. Also, that framework in how organizations that are seeking insurance or support are being evaluated. So with that, I want to get to the introductions, and the first individual I want to introduce is Dmitry Alperovich. I've already mentioned his name. He's the co-founder and chief technology officer of CrowdStrike Incorporated. There he leads their intelligence, labs, and product teams. Prior to his time with CrowdStrike, he's the vice president of threat research for McAfee. In 2010 and 2011, he led the global team that investigated and brought to light the cyber espionage intrusions of Operation Aurora, Night Dragon, and Shady Rat. Now, many of us know those because we worked through those and were affected by them and have knowledge into them. But Dmitry not only was the one that found those, but he also was the one that was privileged to name them. He gave their names. And I also want to mention that I just learned that CrowdStrike had, with their involvement and working with the FBI, they were also able to have a major win against the Zeus virus. So Dmitry's deep into this. He's had numerous prestigious awards. The same awards that Dmitry has won have also been won by luminaries such as Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Mark Zuckerberg. This is the class that Dmitry is in. He's an inventor of 23 patented technologies, and in short, he's recognized as a global authority on cyber espionage, cyber warfare, and online organized criminal activity and cybersecurity. With that, Dmitry.
Thank you very much, Harry, conference organizers. It's great to be back. It's my second time attending and speaking at this wonderful event. Truly a fantastic event, so I'm really happy to be back here. And also grateful that cane does look very menacing, Harry, so I'm glad that the seating arrangement was rearranged, so I'm a little bit further away. But I'll try to be brief because I think we want to get some engagement with the audience and take your questions. As I look back on 2014, it's truly been a remarkable year. And as overused as this word is, I do think it was a watershed year, not necessarily in terms of the attacks we have seen. Certainly we have seen escalating attacks and significant developments in the threat landscape side. But primarily, I think we're finally getting to the point where we're getting on a path to figuring out how to respond to these things. And the number of events that have occurred in 2014, I think, were truly groundbreaking from the response, both from the private sector and the government. The one thing that I'm very optimistic about is that we're finally, I think, understanding or coming close to understanding what public-private partnership truly means. We've been talking about public-private partnerships, information sharing for well over a decade. And in the past, the way public-private partnerships, have been treated is essentially the government coming to the private sector and treating them as a victim, right? Give me all the information from the event, let me give you some classified briefings on what's going on. It has not been a true equal partnerships where the two parties can work together and collaborate together, which is really, I think, where we need to get from information sharing to collaboration in order to bring some effects and cause some true pain to the adversaries. Because the private sector has tremendous amount of information, has tremendous amount of capabilities, and working together with the government, I think we can achieve significant impact. And let me give you a few examples that I think highlight that. One is the example that Harry just mentioned, which is the Game Over Zeus operation, which was that true collaboration, I think pretty unprecedented collaboration between, in that particular situation, the FBI and the private sector. At CrowdStrike, we were privileged to participate and have a pretty clear role in that operation as well. But what occurred is that the FBI organized a number of years ago a botnet threat focus cell, a cell that included private sector organizations, security companies like CrowdStrike and Symantec and some others, financial organizations and others that have both expertise and unique visibility into this problem, a number of government agencies participating as well. And a couple of years ago, they came to this group and asked a question that the FBI has never asked before, which is, which actor should we go after, right? There are a number of botnets out there, a number of threats. Which one do you, private sector, believe is most important for us to target? FBI doesn't do this, right? They decide who they prosecute, who they investigate, and on occasion they may ask a private sector for some help in a very limited circumstances, but this was truly unprecedented. They said, private sector, you pick the target. You know the landscape very well. You are suffering the impacts of this of these threats. So you tell us who you think is the number one target for us to go after. And the private sector, the financial sector, was particularly helpful there. They looked at their losses and sort of ranked and stacked the various botnets. And Game Over Zeus came up to the top because of both the spread of the botnet, the financial loss associated with it, as well as the information that the private sector actually had and the visibility we had, and the opportunities that we had to disrupt the botnet itself, as well as to uncover who was behind it and have FBI using its law enforcement authorities actually do something about it. So after that decision, another unprecedented thing happened, which is for the next 11 months or so, the private sector and the FBI worked hand in hand together to plan and coordinate a joint operation to take down this botnet, to have prosecutions and arrests against the groups that have been involved in this particular botnet. So in May of last year, we at CrowdStrike actually executed on behalf of the FBI the operation that took down that botnet. It was a very complicated operation. Game Over Zeus is one of the most complicated botnets. It's using peer-to-peer communications. There's no centralized command and control. It's using very good cryptographic encryption to coordinate its operations. So very, very difficult operation to conduct. And we were able to do that in coordination with some other security vendors. And the FBI at the same time executed arrests and search warrants and other things to help take down the botnet and arrest some of the key people that have been involved. Truly unprecedented step that highlighted the power of a true partnership, true collaboration where private sector and the government can come together and actually achieve an effect. We couldn't have done it alone. We didn't have the authorities to do that. We didn't have the capabilities to go into places like Ukraine, for example, which the FBI did with their partners on the ground there and execute takedowns and search warrants. FBI couldn't have done it without us because they didn't have the technical capabilities, they didn't have the visibility that the private sector had to actually conduct that operation. So I think that operation really is a model for how we move forward and leverage the capabilities and the authorities in the government and in the private sector to actually have an impact. The Sony event was also, I think, truly remarkable. Not so much in the impact. We have certainly seen companies come under destructive attacks before. We've seen exfiltration of data. We have seen significant releases of private information as what happened at Sony. But the response from the government in terms of naming the country responsible, North Korea. They've never done that before. Actually, for the first time ever, instituting sanctions in response to cyber attack, economic sanctions against a number of individuals within the North Korean government is truly unprecedented. And I think highlights that we're finally realizing that this is all about the adversary, right? This is not about a whack-a-mole strategy about trying to keep them out. They will get in, but we need to institute some deterrence. We need to leverage the incredible attribution capabilities we have both in the private sector and the government. In fact, a lot of people were surprised how quickly the government was able to attribute it because many people who are not in the classified realm don't realize that most of the attacks that we have seen over the last decade have been attributed very rapidly by the government. It's just that the information has always been classified and the public never had exposure to it. So in this case, they did decide to declassify it. But the private sector conducts attribution on a regular basis as well. We've actually been tracking this North Korean actor going back to 2006, had tremendous visibilities into a variety of their activities, primarily in the South Korean peninsula, and we're able to come out very quickly and attribute it just with our own sources and methods. That capability really needs to be leveraged more by the government as well, because we do have, in the private sector collectively, tremendous visibility into what these actors are doing, the victims that they target, how they operate, and are often able to uncover their identities. In fact, if you look at the Target breach, Brian Krebs, an investigator that used to be with the Washington Post, now a blogger, was able to attribute the Target attack literally within a couple of weeks to specific individuals in Ukraine. So the idea that attribution in cyberspace is hard or impossible, I think is really proving to be quite false, because it is being done routinely. It may not be necessarily easy, but collectively, what the government has, what the private sector has, can be very, very effective at actually identifying these threat actors. And now we're actually getting to the point where we are thinking through, now that we know who they are, what are we going to do to create some deterrence, sanctions, prosecutions, indictments. Another incredible event that occurred is that for the first time ever, in May also of last year, the FBI indicted 5 PLA officers who were part of a second bureau of the 3rd PLA conducting incredible number of espionage attacks. In fact, they were the ones responsible for the Shady Rat report, for the Shady Rat attack that I wrote a report on a number of years ago. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going. There's still a long road ahead, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I don't think it's an oncoming train. Thank you.
It's obvious that I'm not used to being with a cane, so it's down there on the floor now. So anyway.
No, keep it. Don't let him have it.
Yeah.
He's going to hit us with it. Come on. All right, Dan.
Our next speaker is Liam Amercha, and he is the manager of security response operations for Symantec. He oversees a team of threat investigators there who respond to the latest malicious, cutting-edge attacks. Now, he works with both private parties and law enforcement agencies to counter these threats. His research has been presented before the U.S. Congress and the British and European Union parliaments. He's best known for his research into Stuxnet, the worm that affected and infected the uranium enrichment facilities in Iran. And this highlighted the vulnerability, frankly, of the critical infrastructure and industrial control systems globally. It also sparked ongoing global conversations about the use of code as a weapon. So the story of his research is documented and recently released in the book Countdown to Zero Day, and this recounts the story of the first cyber weapon and its relatives, Dooku, Flamer, and Gauss. Liam?
Thank you very much, Harry. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Colorado. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk about public-private partnerships, because it's something that I've observed being changed within Symantec for the last 10 years. Excuse me. So for the last 10 years, we've been trying to build partnerships with law enforcement primarily to try and have botnets taken down and mainly to have attackers arrested and taken away. So I would say what we've seen over the last 10 years is that public-private partnerships do work, and they work if it's a partnership and it's a two-way street. But there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of improvements that we can make. About 10 years ago, Symantec didn't really do public-private partnerships very much, but at that time we realized we have this incredibly rich data about the threat landscape, about attackers, about their infrastructure, the command and control servers, when they change strategies, the victims, how much money is being taken, and often attribution down to the actual identity of the attackers. And we wanted to do something more than just have these attacks go away for a short time and then have the attackers just reemerge with another attack shortly afterwards. So we wanted to have, the goal was to have these attackers arrested and eliminate those attacks from the threat landscape permanently. So we started working with law enforcement, FBI, Secret Service, computer emergency response teams, the NCFTA, and also doing civil lawsuits ourselves and doing takedowns ourselves. And what we learned from that, we learned quite a few lessons from that. And I just wanted to go through some of the lessons that we've learned from that. And although our case is specifically dealing with law enforcement, I think the lessons that we've learned are very relevant to the audience here and to anybody trying to do public-private partnerships in general. We learned, one, that it needs to be a partnership, so it needs to be a two-way street. If it's just us providing information to law enforcement and not getting any feedback back, it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work for the private industry, so we don't do that, in which case it doesn't work for the public partners either. So it needs to be a partnership. You need to have a joint goal, and both partners need to get rewarded out of the work that they put into it. Secondly, we learned that the people that we worked with in all these different agencies are really, really great people. They're technically very strong. They're able to take on the information that we provide them. They're able to digest it. They're able to augment that with research from other researchers and companies, and they're able to build very strong cases. But they're tied up with paperwork. They're tied up with the system, with the judicial system, with interagency communication, with communication internationally, cooperation internationally, and it really makes the whole operation slow down. So while everybody we've dealt with is technically very competent and very able to digest the technical side very quickly, the paperwork side really causes trouble. And that leads to the third lesson that we've learned, which is that these cases are slow. They're really, really slow. So we have one case that's open for 2 years at the moment, and we just got word that there's not going to be any arrests on that case for at least another year. We have another case that's open for 4 years, and we don't see any action happening on that anytime soon. So it really is a big commitment from the private sector to engage for that amount of time, because the attackers are still active, they're still infecting people, they're still attacking our customers. We still have to monitor them. When they change strategies, we have to change strategies. We've put a lot of work into protecting our customers during that period of time. So we really need to shorten that period of time. And the last lesson we've learned is that we really need to get results. So having 4 years and then not getting results, as in arrests, which is what we're looking for, is really detrimental to the partnership and to the relationship, because we can do disruption and sometimes we can do limited takedowns ourselves or with cooperation from other private parties without going to partnerships with the public sector. And we can do that on day one when we bring the case to law enforcement. So if we don't get results, we end up spending 2, 3, 4 years working on these cases. And at the end, if we don't get arrests, we might get disruption via law enforcement or takedowns via law enforcement. But actually, we find that that's just bringing us back to day one, where we could have attempted to do that ourselves in some limited fashion anyway. So that's the fourth lesson that we've learned, is that we really need to drive results here. We need to get people arrested, and we need to take the threats and the attacks out of the threat landscape permanently, rather than just having disruption. So I would say that we have really rich, detailed information about the threat landscape, about attackers. We're more than willing to share that with public partners, with anybody who can help to drive results, which is to have these attacks and these attackers removed from the threat landscape in a permanent fashion. And we're more than happy to work with any public entities that will help to drive that. So I would say that information sharing does work. It has to work in partnership. It has to be a two-way street. But we need to be better, we need to be faster, and we need to drive results.
Thanks, Liam. As a reminder, if you have written questions, you can write those down on the paper and pass it to the ends. There's people who are going to be picking those up. And if maybe I could ask the people on the ends of the aisles, if you do have papers, if you could raise your hand for the roamers that are here. If you don't want to write a question, we're also going to have the open mic system that you can ask questions of our panel members here at the conclusion. So we've got two different ways for you to express your questions to our panel members. Next individual I want to introduce is John Stewart. John and I have worked together for a long, long time. He is the Senior Vice President, Chief Security, and Trust Officer for Cisco. And John's role there underscores Cisco's commitment to address security as the #1 issue in boardrooms and on the minds of top leaders around the globe. His mission is to protect Cisco's customers, Cisco's mature and emerging solution portfolio, and Cisco itself from the expanding threat landscape that's unfolding in the era of cloud and the Internet of Everything. I can also say that he has been for years a close advisor to John Chambers. These folks exchange ideas all the time. And of course, John Chambers, I think it's got to be the longest or one of the longest serving CEOs of a major international organization, and I'm very well respected, quoted the other day also by our keynote speaker, Mark Weatherford. John sits on numerous technical advisory boards and is a member of the boards of directors for various organizations. Additionally, he serves on the Council of Experts for the Global Cybersecurity Center. And with me, and I've had the pleasure of working with John personally on the Cybersecurity Programs Advisory Board for the University of Maryland University College, which is online degree programs. Matter of fact, we developed 1 bachelor's degree in cybersecurity and 4 different master's degrees in cybersecurity over the last 3 or 4 years. Also, John, as I mentioned earlier, was served on the Commission on Cybersecurity for the President. Most recently, John was awarded the Global Golden Bridge Award and the CSO 40 Silver Award for the 2014 Chief Security Officer of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, John Stewart.
So I actually am competitive enough to feel disappointed about the silver, if you can believe that. It's just the nature of wanting to win. And apologies for my voice as the conversation started with Harry introducing us. I got in a little bit late, and so my voice is just a little bit rough. I would have loved to have said it was because I was drinking with all of you. It was not, though I must give props to United Airlines for getting us here at all, because they went really the extra mile. I want to take the theme of the panel and drill into it. So it's protecting cyberspace, policy partnerships, and practical solutions. And I want to start off with one observation in a way that I try and frame the world to determine how to answer a question such as the one Harry put to us. And it starts off with the way that I view the world, which is headlines, bylines, and trend lines, something I've spoken about publicly in the past. And my observation is that at the moment, we're watching a series of headlines play themselves out very vocally. And it includes the specter of North Korea being in cyber attacking Sony. It includes an unknown actor attacking the German steel mills that the BSI recently acknowledged in December. It certainly includes the endless number of breaches in which credit cards have been taken outside of the controlled zone or personal health information as well. And it's what we end up reading on a day-to-day basis. While important, I have a tendency to put those to the side. And that's not to suggest that the impact on those organizations was small or my commitment and my company's commitment, and certainly all of your commitment, should be underwhelming. It should be overwhelming to help. But rather the fact that it can distract me from thinking about bylines and trend lines. And the bylines to me are the political, military, economic, and certainly the division. And what I mean by that is that there is a political rhetoric going on across the globe about cyber, about who is good and who is bad, what is good and what is bad. There's a military discussion certainly involved in this, and the Air Force has been a leader in this respect, both because you're a victim, but you're also, in some cases, the force of power to make sure that some of these things don't get completely out of control. There's an economic discussion to be had, and in some countries they've actually measured the economic impact. The United States has done a partial measurement over the GDP loss that we all, as 300 million Americans, end up bearing in some respects of both loss of intellectual property, disruption to systems, reparation, and the like. And then there's, and this is the most disturbing one, there's a division. The internet was designed to help bring people together. It is now starting to bring people apart. That creates the trend line that I would observe. The trend lines that all of us in the operational world, and certainly Dimitri, being an expert in this, brought it up eloquently, as did Harry when he was first making the introduction, is that we have an incredible acceleration of offensive activity of all types. We've got an increased victims list, which is not an encouraging discussion because the victims are typically the ones that had the most probable capability to not be a victim. We have an increased set of hostility, and then in more and probably disturbing scenarios, we have more hostile groups that are taking action. So this leads me to the policy partnership practical solution part. And for those of you who have been bored by me talking in the past, you'll know that I talk in threes. I've never explained it. Don't ask me why. It's why I love baseball. But I try and distill things down to three elements in each and every case, and I will in this case as well. The first in the policy domain is we have to stop talking like cyber is one thing. Cyber, in fact, is not. There's cyber in the government-to-government espionage context, and government espionage has been going on since the days of the Romans. There's cyber in the corporate espionage context, and frankly, while that's been going on as frequently, when government starts targeting companies, that's a different point of view. There's crime, and that's not an uncommon scenario either. We've experienced crime all the way into the physical world for a long, long time. There's disruption of service. There's destruction of service. And then there's what I would call cyber advocacy, which can inflame a debate and create a disruption in the physical world just by propaganda alone. I could argue in some cases an example of that would be cyber terrorism as it's known. So I think we have to stop talking about it as one thing because the answers to the various elements I just described have very, very unique aspects that are not solved by the same people. We have to define, frankly, what the United States stands for. I travel the globe. I was just in Germany 3 weeks ago. I was in China 3 months before that. I've been in Belgium, France, and a whole host of other places, and frankly, it all blurs together because eventually what you begin to realize is that the United States on the outside does not show up the same way depending on who shows up. And the despairing part about that part is that the leadership of both State Department, White House, certainly the legal side, DOD, Congress, what is bad and what is good is the one thing that most parts of the world look to the United States to define. And if we don't decide what is bad and what is good, and are very crisp about it and repeat it endlessly, we're gonna get worked. And to be perfectly blunt, we're starting to get worked because there is one message coming out of other countries and they're very consistent about it. And they're starting to show up as consistent, which means they're gonna get listened to just that little bit much more. And we need, frankly, I think the world needs, and still looks to the United States to lead in this respect. The third one is that we gotta find common ground, even with people in countries that we struggle with as a nation. We don't, as most nations, ever agree that terrorism is a good thing, and that's common ground in the cyber world. We agree on health and human services, the safety of citizens. We agree on human trafficking being something that should not be allowed. We definitely agree on the exploitation of children being unacceptable in the internet context. And instead of talking about what divides us, which is another thing that I just read in the newspaper this morning about what does, we have to start working on what actually connects us. Because the divisive conversation I have with my spouse or my friends almost inevitably leads to more fighting. For those of you that are married, I imagine you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who have met my spouse, you also probably know what I'm talking about. And by the way, I'd probably just started another fight if this is on video. On the policy side of it, that's where I largely land. On the partnership sides of it, we're going to have to frankly decide that there are partnerships that are going to be hard and still do them. For example, there's a Trans-Pacific partnership that has to be defined between China, Russia, and the United States, period. They're in cyber just as much as we are. They struggle in cyber just as much as we are. And frankly, they do it differently and they act differently. And yet, if we continue to inflame the debate, they're just going to keep going their way and we're just going to keep going ours. There's a transatlantic one. UK and Germany are probably the most influential at the moment. And Germany isn't necessarily an ally to the United States in the discussions around cyber because she's upset as a country. And I mean really upset as a country if you go to Germany, talking to the common citizens over what they think versus what they actually know. And then there's rest of the world, UAE, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, most likely. Because we have to deal with this ever-increasing discussion around electronics being used as terrorist capabilities. So we have to create partnerships with non-linear, sort of natural, and in some cases adversarial groups, because in this domain I think we all find ourselves a little bit exposed. On the practical solutions part, I think the first one is that we have to think differently. There's machine-based collaboration happening all the time. It happens with, in fact, all of the companies we represent up here. And it's working exceptionally well. And ironically, there's no political or legal framework other than making sure we don't go offensive that's getting in its way. And so how about building more and more on that capacity and making sure that it continues to protect most of the internet? We have to enable the informal versus the formal. I think we get wired up on creating something brand new, structure, put a board on it, create a group. And then there's the informal group, and that includes some of the ones that took down Zeus and the botnet and Configure Cabal groups that are much more effective if we just stay out of their way. And that includes nations all across the board. We have to do a following model. I look to a colleague to my left, and the CP&I model works exceptionally well. And I've seen it work in terms of activities that help hold nations in critical infrastructure. We have to play long ball. This is not going to get solved tomorrow, and we have to stop thinking it's going to get solved in a month. We have to create dynamic environments, including in policy, and we most assuredly have to start confusing the adversaries so that they stop getting so successful in that trend line. With that as a backdrop, I'll leave this one word of caution, and maybe it's a piece of a couple of themes. There are economic consequences when you're living in a glass house. We have a series of soft targets as one of the most advanced nations in using electronics in our country and our military, just as much as in our civilian side. And there are unintended consequences to almost everything I just suggested we do that haven't been gamed out in the third and fourth order moves versus the first step. Because we're in a rare moment where the superiority, both economically, militarily, and frankly, culturally, is trying to be fought on an even playing ground in a way that, in fact, is not necessarily allowing those strengths to play out to their far and most large reach that we used to be able to have consistently able to exploit. I'll leave it with that. Thank you for allowing me.
Thank you, John. Well, I mentioned to you that his plane landed at 2:15 this morning. He responded to my early morning email at 5:30 a.m., and I note that in his comments, he still had time to read the newspaper this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the definition of resilience.
Give me at 3 p.m., Harry.
Okay, our next speaker and our last speaker today is Major General retired Suzanne Zan Vautrinot. And of course, not unfamiliar to the individuals here at Peterson Air Force Base and to most of the folks in this room. Zan is the president of Kilovolt Consulting Incorporated. She's former commander of the 24th Air Force and the commander of Air Force's cyber. There she oversaw a multi-billion-dollar cyber enterprise. She led a workforce of 14,000 military, civilians, and contractors, and she supported 850,000 customers and conducted cyber ops globally. There's a number of people sitting very close to me right now. They're very familiar with those numbers because they're responsible now. She has over 3 decades of experience in space and cyber operations. She retired in October of 2013. And I thought of her immediately to be a panel member because I think she might be able to give us some perspectives of a transition from a very successful military career into the world of industry. So in industry, she advises industry, academia, government agencies, and labs on cybersecurity strategy, technology innovation, and workforce development. She's on the boards of directors of Symantec Corporation, Ecolab Incorporated, and Parsons Corporation. And she's an advisor to the Air Force Doctrine Advisory Group, America 300, the University of Texas Pre-Freshman Engineering Program, and she serves on the board of directors of the Uniformed Services Benefit Association. You can see she's been retired for a little over a year, and it looks like people came calling. So Zan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. This is old home week for me because for 3 decades, you all were family. And the nice thing about the transition that General Raduege just pointed out is now the folks at this table and a lot of the folks in the room that are not in uniform are also family. So if you're gonna sit in Colorado and notice the mountains, my family used to have a saying, don't make mountains out of molehills. And I have noticed that in my government time, there were a number of the entities that wanted to say that this was a molehill. Cybersecurity was a molehill. And there are elements of the private sector that would say the same thing, and they are wrong. It is a mountain. But it is, like the mountains and the 14,000 footers around here, absolutely scalable. And so the extraordinary experts here at the panel, as well as in the audience, have been part of that scaling for quite some time. And so while General Allardyce went all the way back to Genghis Khan, I'm just gonna go back a decade because in working with the folks that have scaled that mountain, there is a pretty good view from the top and on the way up. And when you get up there, you notice a couple of the things. The first thing is that stuff flows downhill. That can be really good and really bad. So the stuff that flows downhill sometimes that's not so good in this area is the discussion of the threat alone. It's kind of the scaremongering and how bad things are gonna be and how tough this is and how many bad guys there are and how many ways they can attack you. That's not exactly helpful to the dialogue about solutions and about how we tackle problems as a community. The other part is, frankly, that those folks that have lived and breathed this for quite some time have a language all their own. And I have found in my time in the boardroom, as well as working with the C-suite folks, that there is unbelievable interest. But sometimes the language gets in the way. And on the government side, some of the military jargon or the law enforcement dialogue gets in the way of the conversation. That's on the downside of flowing downhill. What flows downhill that is extraordinary is that in that last decade that General Raduege described, the path that the government went through with some folks on the private industry side that were partners in that dialogue is exactly the same path that folks that are just now joining the dialogue are going through. And it's a lot easier to get up the mountain if you know the path. And so part of that partnership is sharing how that path was traversed and which things worked on the way up, rather than having everyone start the dialogue as though it's new, because it's not. As a matter of fact, sometimes intrusions are the same intrusion from 5, 6 years ago, and they're just catching up with the folks that were unaware of that fact and didn't know how to protect themselves. The other part of looking down from that precipice is that you see a lot of the activity and it becomes a global view. It is not a couple of intrusions, it is a dynamic that is happening across networks and at all endpoints and in all systems globally. And so, as General Raduege pointed out, I'm fortunate to be with the boards of directors in a couple of different sectors. One, of course, cybersecurity technology, another that is research and development, manufacturing, and distribution globally, and another is design, engineering, and construction globally. In every one of those sectors, they are seeing the same kinds of pattern and the same capabilities to address those concerns. And they are equally concerned. The difference in the partnerships are who they need to work with. So let me give you a couple of examples of really good partnership kind of activities and what I'm seeing on that side. So Liam, I'll start with Symantec only because I'm most familiar, but everyone remembers the Target breach as well as Home Depot. In the Target breach, there were 2 responses from those that were in the cybersecurity business. One of them was, we told you, why didn't you do something? And one of them was, we are a partner of yours, you have bought our capabilities, and yet you were unable to use those. How do I help? And so at Symantec, at a very, very senior level, I watched them create a white glove program to go out to all of the folks that had these capabilities and find out, were they turned off? Were they not fully instantiated? Were they not at the most recent level? It was called a white glove program, and it was done without remuneration. And that's not all because there was an altruistic behavior. It was because the corporation recognized that there is a reputational risk when those you support are not successful. That's just one example. In Parsons Corporation, they design, construct, build all kinds of things that you may or may not touch, but they include rail transportation systems and airports, as well as horizontal and vertical construction. I've learned those words, it's really cool. What they found is that you don't want to bolt it on in cybersecurity after the fact. You want to understand what's available on the front end. And as all the folks in leadership at Cyber Command and here at AppSpace have said for many years, you want to bake it in, not bolt it on. So they actually acquired 2 companies, Secure Mission Solutions and Sparta, so that they could start that dialogue inside the company relative to engineering. And they just partnered with Boeing, Raytheon, I'm gonna miss a whole bunch of them, and they're wonderful, wonderful organizations, but they partnered for Cal State San Luis Obispo to create an engineering program that includes cybersecurity as part of the coursework. Not going and finding an IT or a cybersecurity guy down the line, but this is part of the design engineering that is the future of how we do development, how we do engineering and construction. And they're working with those same folks that can provide the capabilities that are being provided by the folks here at the table and out there. 2 great examples. Liam talked about some of the difficulty in working with law enforcement. And there, as Dimitri pointed out, there have been successes. But in each of the cases that I just mentioned, whether it's working directly, whether it's partnering with the folks that are building the Internet of Things, the baby monitors that we know are hackable, or the light bulbs that are hackable, and working with those folks that build them to try to design out those problems. All of those things are somewhat anecdotal. And so the thing that we are noticing in the partnerships is they are absolutely successful when they are brought to bear, but they have to be nurtured. I found this when I had the privilege to be in the position that Ed Wilson's now in. All kinds of cooperative research and development agreements. They are wonderful 1v1 relationships and sharing. Unfortunately, they have to be nurtured very actively at a leadership level, because on the private sector side, sometimes the lawyers get goosey, and rightly so. And on the public sector side, on the government side, it is much easier to just look at the policies that have to do with contracting and try to overlay those on a CRADA that was supposed to be something independent, a different way of doing business, or not recognize that the 1v1 relationship of a CRADA can be opened to others. It requires constant push, or they immediately drop off, and all that work that was done on the front end is for naught. The same thing is true of welcoming in young folks as interns or as members of your community. when I was at Network Warfare at Fort Meade, when we brought in the young Air Force Academy cadets for a 9-week program, we cleared them on everything. And I do mean everything. People were goosey as can be about what these young cadets could see. But the things that they learned and were able to take back, not telling their compatriots how they knew things, but the comment was, it was a little like, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. And the level of understanding immediately raised. The problem is that that didn't always continue. And when we brought in young folks in follow-on years to some organizations, they weren't cleared to truly understand the detail of what was going on because leadership didn't engage to make sure that happened. So I will leave you with, yes, there are great public-private opportunities. All 3 of the companies I'm working with are global, so those opportunities are not just here. They are with Interpol, they are with an extraordinary group in the UK, and GCHQ that do this as well, with Australians that have published extraordinary work on whitelisting and methodologies that work for everyone even before you apply technology. There are global solutions. It requires trust and shared information. It requires shared technology, which gets easier and easier if you don't worry too much about the organizational equities and let them get in the way of solutions. But it also requires shared responsibility. So to the point that General Allardyce Smith this morning, if you say, I'm going to work around it because I don't like it, then you are part of the problem because you're not sharing responsibility for a solution that is workable and that we can all sign up to. You're simply creating a different environment. So I'm all for privateers. That's not the same thing as the pirates, and it's not the same thing as the government. Our nation put the private sector on the front lines when we created the nation, and I think we could do it here as well.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, we're going to launch into some questions now. Those of you who want to ask from a mic, please raise your hand so the mic handlers can get to you. Let me read one of the questions that came from the audience right now and see if anyone on the panel would like to respond. Not everybody has to respond, but if you have something to say, you can. We'll try and get as many questions in the 10 minutes we have remaining. Does the success of the Zeus partnership make the private industry a more attractive target for state-sponsored cyber targeting, and how will this impact our definition of when such targeting becomes an act of war against the United States?
Yes, I can take it first. I mean, I've got news for you. Private sector has been targeted by nation states for a good part of the last decade. So that's certainly not changing, and in fact is accelerating, as we've seen with Sony and other types of attacks. So the idea that we should sit back and do nothing for the fear that it's only going to get worse, I just don't accept. To me, that's appeasement, and we got to do something about the adversary in order to make things better. The one thing I will say is that from a nation-state perspective, it is hard sometimes for companies to think through non-cyber responses to these attacks because of political issues, because of business interests they may have in, for example, China, and thinking through how they would engage with the U.S. government on that issue if they're worried about the impact of their business if that information comes out publicly. I know for a fact that with the 5 companies that were victims of the Chinese espionage who were named in those indictments, a number of those companies were not very happy to be named as victims because they do still have a lot of business interests in China, and they were very worried that the impact of those indictments would negatively affect them in terms of their business. So we do still have, from a risk management perspective, a lot of companies, and I visit with CEOs and boards of directors all the time, there is still a mentality from a risk management perspective that in the case of China, for example, they may steal $1 billion of intellectual property from me this year, but I'm going to make 4, and it's still worth it. And maybe it's the right decision for them. In my opinion, it's a short-term thinking, because in a couple of years, they'll steal everything, and they'll compete with you, and they'll put you out of business. But it is the decision that a lot of people are making right now. But at least they're understanding the problem. So I think we have improved dramatically in our understanding of the threat and the adversaries, and at least now they're making a more educated decision.
Very good. Do we have a question out here?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Chip Block. The president has proposed a national breach notification law. Right now, there's 48 different laws. The definition of what is a breach and who you notified has a lot of unintended consequences. That includes HIPAA in Florida, includes in some states any username and password. Could you give me your views on what you think should classify as a breach notification and who should be notified?
Anyone like to address that from the panel?
I'll do a portion of it because I've watched this play out in both practice as in let's get ready and make sure that we have a process, as well as concerns from the private sector side. So for example, when there is a breach, as we have seen on the military side, sometimes you get OSI or NCIS that comes in and says, I need you to dial it down because in order to get after those who breached us, we have a lot of forensics work to do and we want to learn a lot more before we take action. So it turns out that in the private sector, the same thing happens with FBI and with the Treasury Department. The problem is when you ask in the private sector for everybody to stay down a little bit and wait on the notification, that doesn't apply to the SEC. So in all of these things that talk about what is a breach and how much information do you provide, we have not gone through the end-to-end consideration of what helps the nation the most in what you can find out about that breach, and what is the amount of information that's truly required to protect individuals as consumers or to protect others in the industry, and how do you provide that information in a way that doesn't put them at more risk because you've just tipped off the folks that are after you. And what's the timing? Because in cyber forensics, and not just attribution, but in looking at the fingerprints and the methodology and how did the entries actually happen, it's not usually a one-step process. There are several elements involved. So it takes some time. And so the speed of providing information and the necessary investigative activities that would happen, for example, in an aircraft crash before you start siphoning off, we think it was maybe, needs to happen in this area. And so while I think it's important that we admit that there's been a problem and help everyone else not be part of the problem and not have a secondary effect, we have a long way to go as a nation in how much information, at what point in time, and to whom, and frankly, not treating those who have been breached as the bad guy. They are the victim. So might be helpful to treat them that way.
If I can just add one small comment. While I'm in favor of a national standard, I think will simplify a lot of things for companies. I do worry about negative incentives, and I'm already seeing it being created because we work at CrowdStrike with companies all the time, doing some response for them. And on occasion, and it's sort of a growing trend, unfortunately, I'm seeing companies saying, you know what, I'm not really interested in having you discover what happened, because if I don't know, I don't need to notify anyone. Just get it done and don't tell me what happened. And I fear that we'll see that more and more.
So I'm going to build a little bit on that last point. So two aspects. One, national breach legislation, to a certain degree, has a potential danger of water diluting some of the state legislation. And I don't believe that it should really be allowed to do that because the citizens of certain states have taken their own positions on what they've defined as in or out of, to answer your question, of the information list. There is a pretty, I would hope, common sense approach that says, what is a company disincentivized to release over what period of time that, in fact, were they not made to do it, would endanger the customer, consumer, the citizen? That's where breach legislation should only focus, where the disincentivization of the company that says, I don't want to tell you because I'm either embarrassed, I'm worried, or I just don't sort of want to make it go away. There are natural disincentives. So for example, if it affects market cap, you're beholden to your shareholders equals a problem with disclosing to your customers. That's where legislation can be the most effective. And the third part I would put into it is that it should be complementary to the accountability of a breach must be known. It cannot create the disincentivization that Dimitri just brought up, which is if I don't, and this is already existing, by the way, and you brought up HIPAA. There are whole scenarios of customers I've worked with that literally will not instrument because by compliance and regulatory frameworks of today, they will do what they have to, and anything else that they do might create more work of having to do something like disclose their customers, and so they're disincentivized at the moment. So it has to be complementary to an enablement that ensures accountability is driven to the corporations, the institutions, and the like, that not knowing is not safe harbor in these circumstances.
One more question and a quick answer. Let's see. Do we have any other microphone folks out here?
Excuse me, sir.
Is that one back there? Okay.
Cadet Second Class, Justin Aket from the United States Air Force Academy. My question's for all 4 members of the panel. So there's some obvious benefits for cadets in the military for us to go intern with our leading companies, but what do these companies actually benefit from having us there since we can't be hired for a few years?
This is easy for me because I've sponsored these programs inside of Cisco for a decade. I could give you the coy answer, which is an employee in 3 years. Might be one simple observation. But the second observation, frankly, is back to my point about informal networks. Having hosted 5 different countries and at least 3 branches of the military in the United States at our operations centers for anywhere from a month to 18 months, what is amazing is when something's up, there is an underground group that's all got call trees that reaches out to each other and says, have you seen, do you know, what do you have, can you clue, can you educate? And that, frankly, is what we get out of it. We get out that network of being able to call when something's going wrong that we see. And then the second thing, and you can't underestimate the value of your contribution in this one, you think differently. It is really easy to be in a bubble in Cisco, for example, and think like Cisco. You get to group think pretty easily. You throw a bit of a drop of water on that calm pond, and your thinking process comes up with some of the most clear insights that we should have figured out. But because we've gotten used to the way we do things, we just didn't see it with your point of view involved. And that diverse input is the second huge value. So the coy answer, obviously, the fact that we actually get the underground partnership, surely. But then don't underestimate the fact that your diverse thinking is going to change our strategy, because it typically does.
I'll add the other side of that one. Working in an organization that had great development capability and had great capacity internally can also make you a little narrow and believe that you have the right answers. And those kinds of direct partnerships, the internships with industry, are a big wake-up call that you are not the smartest guy on the block, and here are all the people you can go talk to. And there is absolutely no reason that the military or any other government agency should be developing something that is already available to them off the shelf because private sector has already been a little bit ahead of them. If you don't know that they're ahead of you, you don't know to ask.
You're young, hungry, and willing to change the world, and we need more of that.
Liam?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the informal networks are a very important part of information sharing and knowledge spreading. So I would say that is a very valuable aspect in the private industry. When we are investigating something, we have a network of people that we can just go and talk to, generally informally, and say, hey, are you seeing something like this? Is this, have you come across this? And gain little pieces of information along the way that help us to put the bigger picture together. So I would say that's a very strong aspect of it.
Well, we're in the red zone now, so I think this great team of panel members has already scored. Thank you very much for your attention.
General Raduege, you've been a very strong supporter of our symposium in the Rocky Mountain chapter, so we would like to thank you for bringing together this fantastic group of panelists. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dean.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to transition down to our luncheon, our honors luncheon sponsored by Sienna, and our guest speaker will be General Hyten. We'll see you down there.